Welcome to Brian Lehrer Live. We're here live Wednesday nights at 7:30. Tonight, reporting on race. Can a traffic accident be caused by institutional racism?
By side and yet have such different experiences? Part of the answer may come from the fact that for the most part, blacks and whites really don't live side by side.
But first, less than 2 weeks to go before the midterm elections, and the internet remains a key battleground. Look at this video being viewed on web video sites that Republicans considered too hot to play on regular television.
In the year 2000, in an effort to stop the North Koreans from building nuclear weapons, President Clinton's Secretary of State Madeleine Albright gave North Korean leader Kim Jong-il a basketball signed by Michael Jordan. The Democrats' thoughtful gift had two major results. The first was this, and the second was this. In a post-9/11 world, making nice to our enemies will not make them nice to us. On the contrary, to them, it is a sign of weakness. Kumbaya, Malone. Kumbaya. Kumbaya. The Democrats have their own ideas on how to stop North Korea from building nuclear weapons. Some people think the terrorists will change their ways if we only show our good intentions. No matter what we do, the fact remains there is evil in the world. History has taught us that evil needs to be confronted, not appeased. Evil dictators will be evil dictators, no matter what we do. Unlike basketball, the security of the United States is not a game. Can we afford a party that treats it like one?
All right, that was an ad by Hollywood producer David Zucker. That's one of the more professionally produced web video ads. We will look at some of the other ways the web is influencing tight races around the country now and ask whether it can even help determine the outcome and maybe affect who controls Congress. My guests, Shelley Lewis, author of the book Naked Republicans, a full frontal exposure of right-wing hypocrisy, and a co-creator of the Air America radio network. She has worked at other major networks before that. And Kristen Powers, a blogger and Fox News analyst. Welcome to the program.
Great to be here. Thank you.
So, Shelley Lewis, Matt Drudge called that too hot for regular television.
You know, what's too hot about it? It's silly. It's over the top. I used to love David Zucker. I loved Airplane, which he did.
Movie, yeah.
But Scary Movie 4, the comic genius who brought you Scary Movie 4 brought you
Scary Democrats.
And, you know, Madeleine Albright's having a really rough fall. First there was a 9/11 movie that was, you know, basically accused her of doing things that she never did, never said. And now this, which is just silly. It's just too silly for TV.
Too silly for TV. Well, Kristen, why does something like this show up on the web? Does somebody think it's going to have an impact, but it's going to get too much backlash if it's on open-air TV?
I think something like this is just preaching to the choir. This is what the hard right thinks when they think of Madeleine Albright or when they think of the Clinton administration. It's not, if they put this up on the air, they'd have to defend it, and it's not defensible.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the fact of the matter is Colin Powell, when he came in, said that the Clinton administration did a great job on their North Korea policy. So they like to pretend that you know, the Clinton administration was coddling all these horrible people. Meanwhile, you have George Bush, who's just best buddies with Vladimir Putin, looking into his soul and seeing all sorts of wonderful things when he's actually a horrific person and a pretty evil sort of dictator type himself. So they would have to actually defend that.
You said preaching to the choir. This is a preaching to the choir election, isn't it? Where the point is to get your faithful to turn out in the midterm elections, and the political strategy is, you know, that's what's going to win for one side or the other?
Well, I mean, the Republicans do have a problem that their base is depressed and that they need them to turn out. I would be hard-pressed to see this being something that's actually going to turn them out. They already think this. This is not new information for them. They already believe this to be true. So the real people, if you're going to move somebody, you're going to move the people in the middle.
Right.
And this kind of stuff is not going to move anybody in the middle.
Do you agree with that, Shelley? Because we've had guests previously in this series who say the reason that web video is as spicy as it is, as spicy as that, is not just because, you know, some wackos put up some wacko stuff, but because the parties are using the web to turn out the faithful, to get them riled up to maximize turnout.
I don't think the parties have their act together all that much. Either of them, I don't think either of them really understands the internet space that well. I think mostly the people who look at those kind of ads are younger and probably, you know, they might find this amusing, but not really engage on it, you know, in terms of how they're going to vote. The independents are really the only, that's where the battle is, you know, and the Republicans seem to have lost the independents almost everywhere.
You might say there is a trend in this election season of ads that are too hot for television showing up on the web. Here's another one, an attack ad against Democratic Representative Harold Ford Jr., who was in a tight race with Republican Bob Corker in the U.S. Senate election in Tennessee. Let's watch.
Harold Ford looks nice. Isn't that enough? Terrorists need their privacy.
When I die, Harold Ford will let me pay taxes again.
Ford's right. I do have too many guns.
I met Harold at the Playboy party.
I'd love to pay higher marriage taxes.
Canada can take care of North Korea. They're not busy.
So we took money from porn movie producers. I mean, who hasn't?
The Republican National Committee is responsible for the content of this advertising.
Harold, call me.
You know, Kristen, one of the what your phone is going
off?
Was that wasn't you, was
No.
it? No. Okay. You know, one of the reasons this ad is controversial is because she's white,
right? Yes.
And Harold Ford is black.
Yeah, well, I'd seen the complaints that there was something racist in the ad, and I watched the ad and I couldn't figure out what was racist about it, and then I had to go talk to a bunch of people who said, well, you know, in the South it's considered taboo for a black man and a white woman. So to me, of course, and living in New York, it would never,
really?
it didn't even occur to me.
I think that's generational.
Yeah, it did not even occur to me, and so it was sort of interesting to find out that that was actually.
Plus, in her dreams, that woman would be in the Playboy Mansion. I hate to tell you.
In her dreams.
You know.
So maybe it's generational, or maybe it's also regional. Maybe that's a hotter question in Tennessee than it is here in Manhattan.
You know, yes, but the campaign is in Tennessee, obviously. The thing that was just so... there are some funny things about that ad until it is, I think, really a racist message in the end. And I know the NAACP wanted it pulled down, and there were a lot of people saying, take it down, including Bob Corker, who said, hey, I didn't make this ad. I don't know nothing about making this.
Well, this gets into a whole campaign finance issue, which is that this was made by one of those independent groups, and so even though it was done somehow in conjunction with the Republican National Committee, which I think funded it, then the RNC lost control over it. They could not legally have it pulled. Corker could not legally have it pulled, correct?
You know what? I don't believe that, because today, before I came here, I checked. I happened to check one of the Nashville newspapers, and it seems that it has magically been pulled somehow.
Yeah,
Which would mean that there was a backlash against it. This ad was backfired. If they pulled it, that would be the only reason.
And they may have known that there was going to be a backlash, and you just get it out there into the conversation, and now all the TV stations are playing it, and now it's there, and it can't be taken back.
Right.
Once it's out, it can't be taken back. And so they may have done it knowing that that was going to happen.
But we're talking about an ad like this being too hot. I mean, Shelley, you were with Air America, spicy liberal talk radio network. There's all this, you know, spicy, no-holds-barred conservative talk radio out there. This is, to me, no more hot than what I might hear on a lot of conservative talk shows.
I think that's right. I mean, you know, I think Rush is still backing up from his Michael J. Fox comments earlier this week, which in many ways are, you know, so much more offensive than anything we've seen so far. I don't know what it means to be too hot, really. I think that's, you know, that's a Matt Drudgeism, and I don't even know what that means.
And yet there's a distinction between what makes it on the web, it's one of the reasons we're doing the series, and what makes it on television.
But there is a difference between what a Rush Limbaugh says or what a Randy Rhoads says versus what a party puts out or somebody puts out. You know, whether Corker's coming out and denouncing it or not, it's associated with the Republican Party. And I think there are some things that are too hot. I think when you're just an entertainer, it's different, you know, but when a party does something, it does backfire on you a little bit.
But that's also an old strategy in politics, isn't it? You know, the good cop, bad cop, where somebody puts out an ad that really is too hot, but speaks to a lot of voters' hot buttons, and then officially the candidate or the campaign denounces it.
I think that's exactly what happened here.
But too hot really means inappropriate or going too far. And I think that if this was racist, then that would be going too far. The rest of it's funny, and I wouldn't see any problem with it. If it wasn't for the allegations of it being racist, it's definitely not a problem.
All right,
but see, too hot means one thing, racist means something else. And they're really, I don't think you can just make it an umbrella too hot. I think that lets them off the hook for those kinds of ads.
In that Tennessee Senate race, Bob Corker is refusing to debate his Democratic opponent, Harold Ford, Ford Jr. This led Ford to take a particular drastic measure, and this video of it made it onto the web video sites last week after being in a television news report. Let's take a look.
He wasn't invited, but he came anyway.
You need to get this bus off our premises, please. Okay. Now.
Harold Ford Jr. crashed opponent Bob Corker's news conference at the Wilson Air Hangar this morning in Memphis. The two shook hands, but there was nothing civil about this meet and greet.
I came to talk about ethics, and I have a press conference, and I think that it's a true sign of desperation that you would pull your bus up when I'm having a press conference.
No, sir. I heard I can never find you anywhere in the state.
What's desperate, says Ford, is Corker's latest ad knocking his family.
Has Junior ever had a job outside of politics?
The Ford family business is politics.
Well, he does look good on TV.
Ford wanted to debate Corker on the spot, but Corker didn't take the bait.
Well, tell me, what do you think about this Iraq thing? I know you're here to talk about my family. I thought you made a promise right after the primary.
No, I'm here to talk about you.
Ford insists showing up at Corker's news conference was not a breach of campaign etiquette, nor was it a desperate move.
I mean, every poll in the country shows us running ahead. Every poll in the state demonstrates it.
All right, so Kristen, that's a calculated risk.
Yeah.
Either you draw attention to the fact that your opponent won't debate you by confronting him like that, or you draw attention to the fact that you're too in his face.
Yeah, I mean, I would have not done that, frankly. You know, I didn't. I saw that. I was kind of, and I really like Harold Ford a lot, and I was a little disappointed that they thought this was a good strategy. I mean, obviously, it's bad that Corker won't debate him. The accusations against his family are ridiculous. I mean, this, you know, he's never worked outside of politics. Well, what did George Bush ever do before he became president? I mean, come on. He's an accomplished person, and he's a good member of Congress, and he's qualified to be senator.
Think that was a smart move, Shelley?
You know, I'm really not sure. I mean, I watched. I tried to see how it was playing to the extent that one can from a distance, and I guess. It was a very high-risk thing to do. And because the issue with him that Corker has raised and that others have raised is that he's got a temper, and does he have the temperament to be a senator, although in this day and age, I mean,
what does that mean?
What does that mean?
Who exactly does that exclude? Yes.
Yeah.
Kristen, you've written on your blog, I see, that you think Harold Ford should be the model for the Democratic Party, and I guess you don't mean that he's good-looking on TV.
Well, I think what I said is he's a star. He's a rising star is what I said, actually. And I just think he's...
But it's his moderate politics that you're talking about,
Yeah, it's his moderate
right?
politics, and I think that he's somebody who brings a little bit of balance, and he takes a lot of positions that, you know, a lot of Democrats don't like, but a lot of the Southern Dems do. For, you know...
Tough on immigration.
Yeah, also on some of the life issues, I think, you know, being against, you know, being for the late-term abortion ban, some of the, you know, things that a lot of Democrats get a lot of flack for. You do see some of the Southern Dems standing up and saying, I'm not going to, you know, I'm going to say that we can have some restrictions here, parental consent, that kind of stuff. And I think, you know, he's smart and he's a rising star. And I think he's, you know, and I think that he's a good sort of counterbalance to what I see as being a lot of the extreme left influence that is maybe taking a disproportionate role in the party right now.
You agree with that, Shelley?
No.
I don't. First of all, I don't know what life is, in the way you use the term life as what you mean is anti-abortion. Then it's anti-abortion.
Yeah.
And extreme, which I guess I don't know which people are the extremists.
I think that that a lot of people see it as being extreme, saying that if you vote against, you know, if you are a Harold Ford type person and you don't support or you support the ban, a lot of people think that a lot of the people in our party attacked him for that. I mean, and really have a problem with it. And I know that he's had a lot of people attack him about that. I think that's extreme to say that you can't take that position.
Well, and I don't think anybody's telling him he can't take that position.
Well, actually,
it's whether he can take the position and get your vote, and that's really all it comes down to.
But there are people that do say that he shouldn't have taken the position.
People have said that about Bob Casey Jr. as well. And on Air America, I can remember a very spirited discussion with Ed Rendell about why he wanted Bob Casey to be the guy to take on Santorum, and that was back before Santorum had the kind of problems that he has, and one wonders you know, if they would have gone for somebody else.
I don't know if this is a regional thing, too, because here you have Harold Ford running as a pseudo-Republican, too strong, in the state of Tennessee. Here in New Jersey, you have Tom Kaine, the Republican candidate, running as a pseudo-Democrat.
Yeah, and what's Chafee? You know.
And Chafee, right, well, you know, it's the dagger in the heart of the moderates, right?
Yeah, yeah.
You can't be a moderate because the party faithful from the other side are going to turn you out.
Right, right. No, I think that's true, and I think that's a problem, and I think the majority of the country actually are more moderate, you know, that they don't reside at the far ends of either party, and so, but yet both parties are completely controlled by the extreme, you know, what I call the extreme elements. An extreme being there's here, and there's a middle. These are the extremes.
Right.
But the middle has been pulled to the right.
Here's another ad, this time from the Democrats and Michigan Governor Jennifer Granholm. Now, Granholm is in a tight battle for re-election this year against an opponent she wants to brand a crony of President Bush, and here's how she did it.
Dick DeVos has been a top supporter of Bush economic policies that have outsourced tens of thousands of our jobs overseas. Dick DeVos and Amway lobbied for Bush's unfair foreign trade agreements that created jobs in places like China, while Michigan was losing jobs. So if you love what George W. Bush has done for America, you'll love Dick DeVos. George Bush, Dick DeVos. Do you see any difference?
Wow. Commercial born in special effects.
It really, have we ever seen the two of them in the same room at the same time? I don't know. That's born of special, that's all about special effects. But I think it's, you know, I think it's very effective.
Kristen, what do you think the place of the web is at this political moment in U.S. history? What's the big picture? What do you think?
Well, I think it's a place that's mostly, and you sort of alluded to this earlier, it's a place where they really gin up the support of the faithful. I mean, the people who tend to be reading blogs and spending a lot of time on the web tend to be the people who are very, you know, the far left or far right. Again, it's not, you don't see a lot of blogs that are just, hi, I'm a moderate and I'm nuanced and I have a lot of, like, you know, I'm really thinking about things in the gray areas. It's really, it really is for the faithful and to reinforce what they already believe and to get more information about that and to kind of rally the troops.
You know, there was an article in the New York Times this summer that called this the YouTube election after the web video site YouTube. Do you think that's overstating it?
Yeah, probably. I do. I mean, you know, we get, because we're in the media, we get all hyped up on, like, the next
media thing,
the media thing, and someone at the New York Times discovered YouTube, and so they did a story about YouTube. I mean, look, I do think it has an influence, but in the end, you see the same tactics, the way cable TV is used, the way television and newspapers are used, and books, you know, publishing. It doesn't feel radically different from 2 years or 4 years ago.
But where they are influential, though, is that they do drive the news cycle a lot.
Well, that's true.
And that they, you know, then that's what didn't used to happen. Things that used to not bubble up and make it into the media now are, because you have people who are just pounding on something over and over and doing all sorts of research and really serving it right up to the reporters to the point that they can't ignore it.
But it goes to all the news, not just this election.
Right, oh yeah, absolutely.
There's another tight election battle spilling over onto YouTube, and that's the campaign of Don Sherwood of Pennsylvania. Now, he suffered a blow recently with reports that he cheated on his wife, and it got worse for him when his alleged mistress accused Sherwood of choking her. Here's the ad he made to try and salvage his campaign, and then in a minute we'll see how it was interpreted in a different way online.
I made a mistake that nearly cost me the love of my wife, Carol, and our daughters. As a family, we've worked through this because of my deep regret, our love, and the fact that the allegation of abuse was never true. While I'm truly sorry for disappointing you, I never wavered from my commitment to reduce taxes, create jobs, and bring home our fair share. Should you forgive me, you can count on me to keep fighting hard for you and your family. I'm Don Sherwood, and I approve this message.
So that was the real ad that aired on TV. Here's how the ad looked on YouTube after a little bit of tinkering.
I made a mistake that nearly cost me the love of my wife, Carol, and our daughters. As a family, we've worked through this because of my deep regret, our love, and the fact that the allegation of abuse was never true. While I'm truly sorry for disappointing you, I never wavered from my commitment to reduce taxes, create jobs, and bring home our fair share. Should you forgive me, you can count on me to keep fighting hard for you and your family. I'm Don Sherwood, and I approve this message.
Now, Shelley Lewis, if I remember correctly, Don Sherwood is one of the stars of your book, Naked Republicans.
He was an inspiration for Naked Republican. He was one of the original. I was reading about him and thinking, what? You can do this? And the Republicans are throwing money at him to prop him up. You didn't, I mean, the parts of the story that you didn't tell that are sort of indicated but not really explained, he did. The young lady involved, and he admitted to having a 5-year-long affair with her. He always denied any assault, but she sued him, and he did settle out of court last November, and did, admitted. So I guess it's, I'm a cheater, not a beater. It's a heck of a campaign slogan. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't necessarily mean he did it. We know that out-of-court settlements sometimes could just be to get
make
the
person
nuisance
go away. Well, right. I'm saying I'm not a beater. I'm not. I don't know, but it didn't help him resolve the issue.
All right. Now, a couple of weeks ago, we talked about claims by the conservative columnist Michelle Malkin that YouTube was censoring her videos. She accused the web video site of having a liberal bias, much like she does with the New York Times and other mainstream media outlets, like the ABC talk show The View. So to fight back against this, Malkin created a show that she puts online that she calls The Vent. Here's some of the episodes she put up last week. You may recognize someone in this show.
Hey, welcome to Hot Air TV. I'm Michelle Malkin, and we are bringing you a very special episode today. On the demand of fans, we try to please. What's interesting is just how callously a lot of these really activist, radical, pro-abortion forces treat women who want to openly say, I regret I had an abortion. And there's this movement, and I think they had an event in New York City after the Ms. Magazine cover came out, Silent No More. And you know what the women on the left do? I can't hear you, I can't hear you.
So, Kristen, my first question is, did you and Michelle Malkin coordinate your black and white outfits?
No. This has happened to us a couple times where we've showed up wearing similar outfits.
Is this good or bad that you have the same taste as Michelle
exactly.
Malkin?
That's the question.
Now, what was that Ms. Magazine thing she referred to?
I think the Ms. Magazine did an annual a campaign where people could come out and say, I had an abortion. And I'm not really sure what the purpose of it was. I guess it was to say.
But she's dumping on it. I guess there's some other kind of campaign for women who had abortions and came to regret it.
Who regretted it? Yeah, I think that she was talking about the fact that it's kind of there are these, and we're going to disagree about this. I can tell you already that there is this world where you hear all about the Ms. the people from the Ms. Magazine. That's the valid feminist view. That's the woman's view. And then the women who come out and say, actually, I wish I hadn't had an abortion, and I went to Planned Parenthood, and I had a bad experience. We don't ever hear about them, and they're not feminists, or they're not. Their view is not as valid. And I think that's what she was talking about, which I don't disagree with. So
yeah, in South Dakota, where a very, very strict anti-abortion, virtually a ban on all abortion except to save the life of a pregnant woman, is on the ballot. The campaign is called an Abortion Hurts Women campaign. They're not doing. In fact, the head of that of the ballot initiative is a woman who says, don't come here with pictures of dead babies and fetuses. This is about women. This is about abortion hurts women. And they're finding that it resonates. That when it first went from the state legislature to the ballot, the people who wanted to reject the bill were well ahead in polling, and now it's very, very close.
Of course, Kristen,
it's a valid point.
Yeah. The point is not to argue, I think, on the part of Ms. Magazine, that abortion is the right choice for every woman.
Right.
The point is to argue that it should be a choice under the law, not prohibited by the government, right?
Right. Well, that's certainly a lot of people's viewpoint, but a lot of people don't have that viewpoint, and I think that that both sides have valid viewpoints, and there is a disproportionate representation of one viewpoint. At least in my experience growing up.
Well, the fact that you refer to anti-abortion as pro-life, I think they've had an enormous influence in the last 10 years.
Well, you know what? No,
the anti-choice
people. That's like saying, pro-life and pro-choice are what it gets called, okay? And you can start making up all these other things, but neither of them are representative. Pro-choice isn't really pro-choice, because when people say pro-choice, they mean you can choose to believe that abortion is okay. They don't say it doesn't. You're not allowed to be anti-abortion. Actually, pro-choice people don't like anti-abortion people. They don't like the choice is women.
Well, it's only about what you can do if you find that
it's not about whether you like people or not. It's whether you have a particular,
But those are, to get caught up in the kind of like that I call it pro-life or pro-choice. I mean, those are the phrases we've been using for the last however many years.
We're not going to solve the abortion debate here tonight, but I just got to know before you go. Do you think The View isn't opinionated enough, and so Michelle Malkin and you need the vent?
I think that The View is an annoying show when I watch it personally. So it's not, and I think that I don't think that there are a lot of, there's a certain kind of views that get addressed or represented, and there's one kind of lone conservative woman who, frankly, I don't agree with on probably 90% of what she says, but you don't really hear from her. I mean, every time she opens her mouth, she's getting screamed at by one of the other girls, women, so it's like, I just don't like that. Like, I like to hear different viewpoints. I like to hear what different people have to say.
Shelley, you produced Good Morning America at ABC. Did you ever have anything to do with The View?
No, I didn't. I was, no, I had nothing to do with The View. I think this is a really interesting idea, though. I do. I enjoyed watching it, even though, it's true, I did not agree with the general line of conversation. I think it's great I love that you can go around the networks and just do a talk show on your own. I think that's great.
Well, frankly, you wouldn't even, the conversation, which you don't show the whole conversation, you wouldn't have that on television. Right. People would their heads would be exploding.
Why not? So that's an important, you agree, both of you, that that's an important function of the web right now.
Absolutely.
But why, in this day and age where it seems like anything goes on television, couldn't that show up on CNN or MSNBC or something?
Well, no, I do think you can have that discussion. I think you could. I think it's one of those things where it's not necessarily something that people will, I think, engage with for a long time. Everybody knows how they feel about that issue, and I don't think we shed a lot of light.
You alienate, whichever side you're on, you're alienating half of the country. You know what I mean? And so it's just, that's the thing. And I just know I do a lot of TV, and only one time has abortion ever come up. It just isn't something, as much as it is such a prevalent issue in politics and the way people choose to vote, we don't talk about it.
Came up here. But the political, are you saying, though, that the political...
Oh, it's okay.
Now, wait a minute. Television networks choose their political orientation on the basis of demographic marketing appeal? Is that what you're saying?
No. Never.
No. Look, I don't even think it's about that so much as... I've been in discussions, programming shows and it could be death penalty, where everybody's where it's very polarized and people have their opinion, and what you're going to get is yelling and chair throwing, and nothing is going to be resolved, and so there might be a better way to spend your time.
We have gone through this whole segment without one chair being thrown.
Oh, is it too late?
If you want to blame Shelley Lewis for something, blame her for giving me my first air job in New York. I was back in the Pleistocene era, I think, at NBC.
Guess it was.
So, thank you.
I'm really happy that I did.
Thank you for coming, Kristen. Thank you for coming. And coming up next, reporting on race. Can a traffic accident be caused by institutional racism? We'll look at excerpts from a Nightline report judged to be a classic example of the best reporting on race in America. This is Brian Lehrer Live.
And so we arrived. We didn't ask to be here. Let's say it just happened. But now we're here, a word in your ear. We don't want your sympathy. We're stronger than you think. We don't want your tears. We have a river of our own. We can do without cynicism, indifference, and abuse. We're not the problem. We're the solution. We'll soon be the future. But right now we are the present. And in truth, we want for only one thing, your consideration. We're children. Don't treat us like kids. You are Give us the chance to become you.
Prominent professors, outstanding students, illustrious alumni, all on the Emmy-nominated magazine show about CUNY. Hi, I'm Dwayne Ferguson. Join us this Sunday when we'll bring you the stories about people and programs that make CUNY a place where you study with the best.
So much about race.
This is Brian Lehrer Live. We're here live Wednesday nights at 7:30. We continue now with a series based on an important new book and DVD about race and the media. It's called The Authentic Voice, the best reporting on race and ethnicity. Rather than look at what's wrong with media coverage of race and ethnicity, Columbia University and the Poynter Institute for Excellence in Journalism decided to identify some examples of the best reporting on race and ethnicity on television and in print. In a minute, we'll show you some excerpts from an ABC News Nightline story about a fatal traffic accident in which no one was out to harm anyone else, no one even knew the race of the other people involved, and yet underlying racism may have been an underlying cause. But first, we want to introduce you to one of the editors of this important and thoughtful collection, Arlene Notoro Morgan, Associate Dean of Programs and Prizes at the Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism and Director of their Let's Do It Better workshop on journalism, race, and ethnicity. Also with us tonight, Walter Fields, journalist and executive editor of North Star News, a website that focuses on black-oriented news. Welcome to the program, both of you. Walter Fields, welcome back.
Thank you for having me.
In your case, you've been here before in your role with the Community Service Society,
yes,
and now as that and North Star News editor. Arlene, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for your attention to this book.
And before we show the clips from Nightline, tell us about the genesis of this book. What did you set out to do?
Well, we've been running the Let's Do It Better workshop since 1999, and after about 5 or 6 years, John Funabiki, who was then at the Ford Foundation and sponsor of the workshop, and I said, well, maybe it's about time we took a look at some of this work and did a book. And it was always my intention to write a book about the coverage of race, because I used to be a recruiter at the Philadelphia Inquirer and for Knight Ridder newspapers. And most of the students, or most of the professionals who would come to the Inquirer, were totally clueless about how to cover the changing face of America. Not only the racial issues, but certainly the demographic changes because of the immigration issues. So John and I said, well, let's do it. And he gave us some money, and then I asked Keith Woods of the Poynter Institute to come in with it, and then Alice Pfeiffer, who had been a producer at 2020 in ABC. And we got together, and 3 years later, here it is.
Well, congratulations, and I'm so glad that it comes with a DVD.
And a website.
And a website. It makes it very accessible for people, whether they're in journalism or not, to get something out of this. Were there certain criteria you were looking for to judge things excellent?
Yes, yes. We had, about the 3rd or 4th year of the program, created a workshop with people who were working in the field and really cared about improving their own performance. And we created this workshop at Poynter, and we came up with a number of issues: voice, context, complexity. So we didn't want to be honoring, you know, the typical salsa festival story. That was not where we were. We were really looking at stories that were complex and really gave people context about what was going on. So those were the criteria. And we also looked for something that was really authentic, something that really you felt that the people who were involved were really talking to you, not the reporter.
So with that, let's look at our first clip from this ABC News story. It's Nightline in Buffalo, 1996.
Cynthia was only 17 when she was hit and killed by a truck
last December.
How you doing, huh?
Now that just makes her one statistic among tens of thousands of other traffic fatalities last year. What else can we tell you about Cynthia? She was an unwed mother, attended school sporadically, and she died after a truck ran over her. But people do not agree on why she was killed. Cynthia, you see, was African American.
It's racism. And that's what caused her death. Racism. 1996, racism is still alive.
I don't know if you can call that anything except racism.
Within Buffalo's white community, you'll find just as many people just as sure that race had absolutely nothing to do with Cynthia's death.
I think it's, to be honest with you, utterly ridiculous that racism is even brought into a situation such as this.
Race is the excuse for everything these days. And anything that happens that's bad, it seems like that's the excuse.
There have been many cases, many things that happen in our society where automatically racism is thrown out, that it's got to be racism without any proof. Well, that's crying wolf.
Remember now, we're talking about a traffic accident. No one has charged that Cynthia Wiggins was run down deliberately. No one has even suggested that she was killed intentionally because of her race. So why do feelings run so high? Why is there such a difference of opinion, clearly split along racial lines? Part of the answer may flow directly out of the fact that Cynthia Wiggins was not really all that extraordinary. She was, in so many ways, a typical teenager, with perhaps a few more problems than her family and friends like to remember.
So that's the beginning, or near the beginning, of the story. We don't even know yet how Cynthia Wiggins died, but ABC has established that there are very different racial points of view here, what they call the Rashomon approach.
And they went into Buffalo because this had been something that was on the news and in talk radio. And Eric Ray, who was the producer, thought this was something to investigate. And Koppel says, and certainly in the DVD interview we did with him, that at first he didn't think it was just a traffic accident. And when we asked him why, he said, well, because of my race, because I'm white, and I just didn't see it the same way, but I trusted Eric, who was black, to go with it. And then they just did the investigation that led to the story.
And we'll see some more clips in a minute, and we'll see the story unfold. But Walter, I guess there's an issue right away regarding diversity in the newsroom and its importance, and that is that in determining what this story was, as well as the content of the story, white people tended not even to see it as being about race, and black people did.
Well, that's why this is such an important work, because I think it's the frame through which these stories are reported, which have major policy implications. You know, it's really interesting. Even Koppel, in his introduction, really describes it almost in an individualistic sort of term. And I think for most of America, racism is an individual act with an individual injury. We don't think about the systemic aspects of racism or racist construction. So I think for journalists sitting in a newsroom, I think it's really important, your perspective. And I think oftentimes not having those other voices really does undervalues the reporting. But it's interesting, sometimes even with those voices present, it's not clear that you're going to get a very objective and I would think a very fair analysis of these incidents. And there have been these incidents across the country. These incidents have often served as flashpoints in communities across America. So this Buffalo incident is one of hundreds that have occurred across
So I want to
country.
play another clip, but then we're going to talk about how, in fact, at ABC News, they deployed white journalists and black journalists on this story in a very particular way, and I'm curious, Walter, what you think about this. But let's see another excerpt from the ABC News story on race and a fatal traffic accident in Buffalo. One of the news stories included in the Authentic Voice, the best reporting on race and ethnicity. Here we begin to learn how transportation issues enter the story.
Buffalo is a poor community. By national standards, something like 37 to 38% of the people live before the poverty line. Unemployment across the city is about 18%. And in many of the black neighborhoods, as high as 25 to 30%.
In fact, more than twice as many blacks are unemployed as whites, and twice as many blacks live below the poverty line. On Cynthia's street, half of the families earn no wages or salary.
There are stretches of the east side of Buffalo that look like downtown Beirut. Just bleak. Plywood is almost the signature emblem of the east side. Boarded over windows, boarded over doors, graffiti-strewn storefronts. This is really, urban America in 1996 in some ways at its worst.
It's a rough neighborhood. She grew up in a rough neighborhood.
Finding a job could be even rougher. Cynthia was 17, hadn't finished high school, and had no real job skills. But she was determined. If there were no jobs to be found in her neighborhood, she would go somewhere else.
There is no big supermarket on the east side of Buffalo. Try and find a hardware store. Try and find a family restaurant.
The irony is that many of the entry-level jobs, the jobs that people use as stepping stones to higher forms of occupation, are located in the suburban region.
Last year, we were unable to place well over 100 people in a lot of jobs that were being offered simply because we couldn't get them out to where the jobs are.
No jobs in the neighborhood? That was one part of the problem. Cynthia didn't have access to a car. That was another part. The only way that she could get to where there were jobs to be found was by city bus.
If you're poor or if you're black or you're without an automobile in the central city, you've got to depend on that bus as a form of transportation.
In fact, roughly a third of the people in Cynthia's neighborhood rely on public transportation to get to work. The bus that Cynthia Wiggins would come to depend on was City Bus number 6. It started down Sycamore Street to Walden Avenue, and about a half hour later, it would drop her off across the city line in the suburb of Cheektowaga. She would step off the bus into a different world.
And we'll see yet more clips in another minute or two. Walter, you know, that was 1996, but you know what it reminds me of? Hurricane Katrina, where one of the issues was that a lot of low-income people in the 9th Ward, most of whom were African-American, didn't own cars because they were poor, and there were no buses to get them the hell out of there.
Well, if you superimpose the transportation grid, the healthcare grid, whatever grid you want to, you're going to find those disparities. And then I sat there watching this clip saying, you know, if he didn't mention Buffalo, I could say Detroit, I could say Washington, D.C., Atlanta. It's endemic of what we're seeing in urban America. It's the intersection of poverty and race. And you're beginning to see these fault lines appear. And that's why this type of work is valuable for people in newsrooms.
And the intersection of poverty and transportation,
yes,
as we saw in that
clip. It's a
clip.
major story that's undercovered, actually.
Indeed. One of the things about reporting this story was that they deployed, for the most part, a black team to interview the black sources and a white team to interview the white sources. Why did they do that?
Because they thought that the white people who they were going to be interviewing, especially some of the officials, would feel more comfortable with the white sources, and certainly the blacks would feel more comfortable in a black situation. It wasn't 100%. Eric Ray did go in and do some interviews with whites also. But on the whole, they decided that if this was such a volatile issue in the community, if they used racially different teams, that they would get a much more honest conversation, and I do think they succeeded. I think it's one of the first times that a television network actually did divide up the teams like that.
Walter, what do you think are the limits of that? Because I'm sure no black journalist wants to be ghettoized into interviewing black sources, and for that matter, no white journalist wants to be ghettoized into just interviewing whites.
I think it's a real difficult call for an editor, but I think I understand why they did it in this case. It's almost like political polling. When you're asked questions about race, no one really wants to reveal their race portfolio to anyone, because if you have some biases, you certainly don't want to be pegged as a racist. So I think people want to be able to speak honestly and openly, and I think that's why they did this. The real challenge, though, I think, is for the journalists who are listening to these stories and whether or not they can digest it and synthesize it when they get back to the newsroom so that they then don't put their own biases in, because sometimes just the idea of hearing these multiple stories with a certain viewpoint can sort of influence your thinking about coverage on an issue. So hopefully what happened when they got back to the newsroom was that there was a real open and honest discussion between both teams about what they heard.
It honestly was an open and honest discussion from the beginning, because Eric really felt strongly about doing this story, and he made sure that he worked with Leroy Sievers, who was the other producer, and Tom Batag, who's white, and to convince, or to at least teach Koppel about this story. And I think that this was really Eric's job, and I think he really felt strongly that the racial dynamics had to be involved in this.
There was
reporting.
one exception to the same race assignment that your book noted, which was that they had a black producer go out and interview that white conservative radio talk show host who we saw in the previous clip. Do you know why that case was different?
I don't know if they did that on purpose or it was just happenstance at the time. I never heard Eric tell me why particularly.
All right. Our next clip from the Nightline story focuses on Cheektowaga. That's the Buffalo suburb where Cynthia Wiggins went to work.
We're very concerned about some of the problems on the east side as they come closer and closer to our town. So what we want to do is make sure that we're taking the steps to maintain our property values. I don't want to lose a neighborhood.
I don't see any racial tension. I don't see it as being a problem, and I wouldn't in any way, shape, or form consider this a segregated community, although our population in terms of blacks that would actually be residents in our community is probably around 3 to 4%.
The arrest number, fill in the arrest number.
The percentage of African Americans in the police department is even lower than that. In fact, it's 0.
It's pretty much the common opinion that within a not too distant future we'll have a black officer on this department.
When officers on the Cheektowaga police force tell you that their department does not discriminate in its hiring practices, you get a strong sense that they really mean it. But before you can even apply to take the exam here to become a police officer, before you can apply for any city job in Cheektowaga, you have to have been a resident in this community for at least 6 months. And for people living in East Buffalo, that is the functional equivalent of saying blacks need not apply. Nobody puts it that way, of course, any more than people talk about the Thruway Mall, one of the older shopping centers in Cheektowaga, as having a predominantly black clientele. People do talk, though, about the high crime rate at the Thruway Mall.
So, Walter, I'm a white guy, and my hair was on fire during that clip, thinking, don't people get it? How did you react?
Well, you know, it's the coded language that we use. So it's not about black or white, it's about property values. It's about problems coming into your area. And you had someone who actually said in the not too distant future, we expect to have a black person on our police. This is 1996. I mean, the not too distant future, hopefully we're there.
Yeah.
But they just don't see it in those terms.
But this is one of the great racial discussions in America for the last 40, 50 years, which is, you know, white flight wasn't about getting away from black people. It was getting away from crime.
Right.
And in the minds of many people who moved out of, you know, changing neighborhoods, that's exactly what it was.
But unfortunately, underneath that, there's another story that goes on that we feel uncomfortable talking about. You know, I can remember the community when I first moved into the town that I lived in. The first weekend after buying a home, after 2 friends visited me, within 5 minutes the police showed up at the door because someone had reported that there were 2 black men walking in the neighborhood. These are white-collar professionals, 6-figure salaries, and I was livid. I said, this is amazing that in the 1990s you could have this situation, but it persists.
So our next clip shows why the bus stop where Cynthia Wiggins was killed was such a treacherous spot.
And when the Pyramid Corporation came to Cheektowaga to build the Walden Galleria, a huge regional shopping mall, there was clearly some nervousness about the crime rate at the Thruway Mall just down the road. Cheektowaga police now say that the level of crime at the Thruway Mall was no different than at any other shopping center in the region. But when the Transit Authority tried to make arrangements for the number 6 bus to stop at the new Galleria, it ran into resistance.
I was surprised, but they'd mentioned one route that they did not want
to have serve the mall, which was Route 6, which is the Sycamore line from downtown Buffalo that currently, at that time, went right by the area where they were building the mall and had been there for many years.
They did ask us about access for the bus traveling down Walden Avenue, and I said to them that we had these concerns about security. We really weren't interested in moving that problem down the highway.
My sense was they weren't too friendly, but they, you know, they were careful, fairly careful in what they said.
About a year after the Galleria opened, a bus stop was set up on the road that ringed the shopping mall. And 2 buses did stop there, one from North Buffalo, the other a shuttle from the nearby Thruway Mall. That shuttle was an option for people like Cynthia coming from East Buffalo, but it would entail a transfer and a 30 to 90-minute wait, which in Buffalo, in the winter, is a very long time. The number 6 bus could have dropped passengers at the same stop, but that would have entailed a 1-mile detour, which the transit authority didn't want to do. So the number 6 continued to let its riders off on Walden Avenue at a place where there was neither a sidewalk nor a crosswalk.
You've got 7 lanes of traffic going across Walden Avenue. There's also a throughway entrance and an exit there as well.
You dodging cars, trucks, vans, and it's difficult. You fear for your life every time you get off that bus.
Danger, yeah. A tragedy waiting to happen. There are lots of tragedies in Black Buffalo waiting to happen. That's just one of them.
So that's how Cynthia Wiggins got killed. They wouldn't let that bus route right into the mall where she had a job.
Right.
So she had to get off where they put the bus stop, which was at this throughway entrance and a really difficult place to cross. So on a snowy, slippery day, she was doing this difficult act of crossing the street, and a car or a truck skidded into her, and she got killed.
The truck ran over her.
Yes.
The whole back wheels killed her, and she died. She was pretty mangled, but she died 3 weeks later. But in that time, the racism charges started, and then the talk show went on and on to fuel it from the white perspective that this wasn't a racist situation, that it was just an accident. But the blacks on that bus knew what this was about. Or the whites who never had to take that bus and drove to the mall didn't have that understanding. And you have to wonder, actually, why does the media have to wait until an accident, a horrendous situation like this, to uncover this kind of discrimination? I mean, what we should be doing is really looking at the transportation stories, the employment stories, the stories of all the Buffalos in the country that really continue the impoverishment of African Americans.
And the fact that this finally got there, even after the fact, is why you included it as one of the best stories on race.
And we thought that Nightline did a really good job of looking at it from a lot of different perspectives. And that's that Rashomon approach.
Our last word on this story now from Professor Henry Taylor on Nightline in 1996. Then we will talk to him live tonight.
It sounds so innocent. Don't let the buses roll into the suburban regions. Don't let the buses roll into the malls. Don't let the buses roll into the industrial parks. But there are major consequences to this. That's why I refer to those transportation issues as racist. Sanitized, guiltless racism. The kind of racism that people can engage in the quietness of their suburban homes.
And joining us live on the phone now from Buffalo is Professor Henry Taylor, chair of the Center for Urban Studies at the University of Buffalo. Dr. Taylor, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Hello.
It's a great pleasure.
So what has changed in 10 years in Buffalo since that incident?
Well, a lot has changed, and not anything has changed. At one level, there's been a continued out-migration of whites into the suburban region. But many of the major transportation issue that led to the death of Cynthia Wiggins, that issue was resolved fairly quickly. And so we don't anticipate that specific type of transportation problem occurring. There's now a black mayor recently elected, and blacks have risen to positions of power within the city and to a certain extent within the region as a whole. On the other hand, the structural problems and issues remain. And ironically enough, at another level, the kinds of problems that emerge in a community where you have large numbers of walkers on roads that are unfriendly continue to place African Americans in jeopardy of injuries because of vehicular traffic and accident by death.
Dr. Taylor, let me jump in because our time is short. Do you think that the media learned anything from that incident and the focus on the reporting that we've been discussing here tonight, and I know you've been listening in?
No. I think at one level, at one point, there was a sensitivity to that, but there's a new level of conservatism in this region. And a reporter, maybe about 6 to 8 months ago, was very much interested in doing a special series on East Side, which would have given him an opportunity to look into some of the structural issues that create so many health problems and other difficulties for African Americans. And the editor of the paper canceled the series.
And is there, at least with 10 years of hindsight, a rough consensus on the part of whites and blacks in Buffalo that those racial structural issues had something to do with Cynthia Wiggins' death?
I think that the divide in that area is still very, very, very strong, with African Americans continuing to believe that those structural issues, the structures of racism were responsible for that, but with most whites continuing to believe that racism had little or nothing to do with the incident, that it was just a traffic accident.
Dr. Taylor, thank you very much for joining us.
It was my pleasure.
And Walter Fields and Arlene Notoro Morgan, thank you very much. And that's it for tonight's show. We are here live Wednesday nights at 7:30. Next week, we'll continue our series on excellent TV reporting on race. We will also speak to other co-editors of this book, and our final pre-election show with one more look at how the campaign is being fought online. And don't forget to check out my daily radio show, weekday mornings at 10 on WNYC, New York Public Radio. Tomorrow morning, PBS documentary producer Ken Burns remembers Negro Leagues baseball great Buck O'Neill, who just died at age 94. That's on 93.9 FM and AM 820 tomorrow morning at 10. Have a great night.